On this show, we compare the best parts of our childhoods and argue which decade was better, the 80s or the 90s.
In this episode, we'll be discussing which decade had the better fashion trend, the history of 1982 versus 1992, and if the 1980s electrical gadget ghetto blasters would fly today.
Which decade was better? You can help us decide.
So stick around for this episode of 10 Years Apart.
We're going back, way back. It's the 10 Years Apart podcast
80's versus 90's
with Adam and Scott.
Welcome to the 10 Years Apart podcast. I'm Scott, one of the hosts, and I'm joined by my co-host, as always, Adam. Adam, how's it going?
It's going very well, thanks.
So this podcast is all about comparing our childhoods. My childhood was growing up during the 80s and Adam during the 90s, making us 10 years apart.
In this episode, we are going to be comparing which decade we thought had the best fashion trend as a child.
I'll pick my favorite fashion trend from the 1980s, and Adam will pick his from the 1990s.
Then we'll debate on which fashion trend was the best. And remember, you can also vote which fashion trend was your favorite from those decades.
You can vote right here if you're watching us on YouTube by clicking on the poll in the top right corner. Or you can vote on any of our social media at 10 Years Apart Pod, or by visiting our website at 10yearsapart.com.
After we get through our debate on the best fashion trend, we'll also have our segment which we call Does It Fly Today?, where we look at a movie, song, or a product from either the 1980s or 1990s and discuss why we feel like it faded away and if we think it would hold up today.
On this episode, we'll be looking back at a 1980s gadget fad, ghetto blasters, and asking, would that fly today?
That will be a little later, so stick around for that too. And before we get into our best fashion trend debate, we're going to start off with the first segment, which we call A Year from Our Past.
A Year from Our Past.
In a year from our past, we'll be doing a brief history look back at a year from each decade and what we remember from those years.
So Scott will be looking at 1982, and I'll be covering 1992.
So I'll get it started with 1982 movies. Some popular movies that came out in 1982 were Tron, 48 Hours, Rocky III, Star Trek, The Wrath of Khan, Gandhi, Fast Times at Ridgemont High, The Dark Crystal, First Blood, Tootsie, Blade Runner, The Thing, Poltergeist, Conan the Barbarian, and of course E.T. The best picture for 1982 was Gandhi, and the highest grossing movie from 1982 was E.T. with approximately $663 million worldwide.
And for 1992, some popular movies released were Reservoir Dogs, Aladdin, Scent of a Woman, A Few Good Men, Unforgiven, Last of the Mohicans, Batman Returns, Wayne's World, Basic Instinct, and The Bodyguard. The film that walked away with the Best Picture Oscar was Unforgiven, and the highest grossing film of 1992 was Aladdin, with $504 million earned worldwide.
So I remember pretty much all of the movies from both decades. From 1992. Actually, one of my favorite movies of all time is The Last of the Mohicans.
Great film.
I really enjoyed that film. I just watched it again recently, actually.
Yeah, it's great.
And of course, Wayne's World was big for me. I was really into that during that time. Unforgiven, I enjoyed. It's not a best picture for me. Like, Last of the Mohicans was better to me.
I think that should have won also.
Basic Instinct was just a thriller that showed some Sharon Stone snatch.
Yeah.
And The Bodyguard, I was surprised. I kind of liked that movie, actually.
Well, it has that iconic song, right, by Whitney Houston?
Yeah. I don't know if it was the music that I liked. But.
Okay.
And of course, from 1982, I mean, First Blood was a great movie.
I remember in British Columbia, they filmed some of that in one of the national parks. And in the pamphlet, when you go in there, it says this is where First Blood was filmed.
That's the first Rambo, for those that don't know.
Yeah. Great movie.
I'm not a big fan of Blade Runner, surprisingly enough. It kind of was boring to me.
Yeah, it's kind of, a lot of people consider it to be like really high up on that sci-fi list, but I like it. I don't think it's amazing or anything, but yeah, it's watchable for me.
Tron was different. Rocky 3, I think that was the one with Mr. T.
Yeah.
Not a Star Trek fan, really, so I didn't care for that movie.
I've heard that a lot of people who are Star Trek diehard fans consider The Wrath of Khan to be the best.
Yeah, I'm sure it is.
Yeah.
Fast Times at Ridgemont High was really good and funny. Out of all those movies, the only ones I saw at that time, like in 1982, was E.T. and maybe The Dark Crystal.
Okay.
All the others I saw later on, like The Thing and Poltergeist shortly after. Conan the Barbarian was one of my favorite movies, actually, in the action fantasy type.
That's the one that kind of put Arnold on the map first, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, for 1982 movies, I'd have to say First Blood I remember watching because I have older brothers who love that movie. I didn't see Blade Runner back then. I saw it, later on in life. I also saw The Thing later on in life, which I think is amazing. I think it's a really good film. And E.T. is a classic. Haven't seen many of the others from 82. The 1992 list I've seen, I think all of these. Reservoir Dogs, I think, is awesome.
Did you see any of those in 1992?
Well, yeah, I mean, Aladdin, obviously, and...
Batman, maybe?
Yeah, Batman Returns. Yeah, I think I saw Wayne's World back then, too. I didn't see, Reservoir Dogs until later on because, obviously, it's a very violent movie. But I really like old-school Tarantino films. Mm-hmm. I still think he makes pretty good stuff nowadays, but I think Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction are my favorite because they're a little bit more gritty.
Yeah, I would agree with that.
Yeah, and like later films of his, like I felt like Django Unchained, a lot of the scenes felt like, it was like a stage play, Didn't have that raw, gritty energy like Reservoir Dogs.
All right, and in music in 1982, some of the hit songs were The Eye of the Tiger by Survivor, Jack and Diane by John Cougar Mellencamp, or just John Cougar at the time, Always on My Mind by Willie Nelson, Private Eyes by Hall & Oates, Don't Stop Believin' by Journey, Working for the Weekend by Loverboy, I Love Rock and Roll by Joan Jett and the Blackhearts, Run to the Hills by Iron Maiden, and the song of the year was Physical by Olivia Newton-John, according to the Billboard Awards, or the Billboard Top 100. And Always on My Mind, sung by Willie Nelson, won the best, or the song of the year for the Grammy.
1992 in music, we had Jump by Criss Cross, Under the Bridge by Red Hot Chili Peppers, Tears in Heaven by Eric Clapton, To Be With You by Mr. Big, Black or White by Michael Jackson, Achy Breaky Heart by Billy Ray Cyrus, and Smells Like Teen Spirit by Nirvana. The song of the year, according to the Billboard Top 100, was End of the Road by Boyz II Men, and Eric Clapton walked away with Grammy for Best Song, Tears in Heaven, which I think was written about his deceased son.
Right, which is a sad story, but
yeah.
Basically I think the kid fell out of a window.
Yeah, accidentally fell out of a window. Tragic.
Yeah. 1992 music, none of them really stick out to me. I mean, Black and White was actually a pretty good song.
Mm-hmm.
Achy Breaky Heart, I mean, you could hear that everywhere.
Yeah.
Smells Like Teen Spirit reminds me of that year where I was when I first got that album.
Mm-hmm.
So that's a song that really sticks out. I don't know what End of the Road is. Never heard Boyz II Men. I'm sure if I heard it, I would.
Yeah, I think Boyz II Men, it's one of those things, I don't know their songs by name, but if I heard it, I'd recognize it.
Right. Criss Cross, Jump, those are the two kids that wore their clothes backwards, I think.
Yep.
And Under the Bridge, that was a really good Red Hot Chili Pepper album.
Yeah.
Not Under the Bridge. That was a song from the album, but that album was pretty good.
What was the album? Something about Sex Magic or
Blood Sugar Sex Magic, I think.
Right. Yeah, that was a great album.
From 82, I mean, most of those songs I obviously heard on the radio. Didn't like all of them. I'm actually a big Hall & Oates fan. They had so many classic songs. And I did get to see them in concert when I was a little older.
Yeah, I like Hall & Oates.
I think a lot of people wouldn't know who they are now, but...
There's a guy with the mustache and then the other dude, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Eye of the Tiger was a classic song from Rocky.
Mm-hmm.
Jack and Diane it's a really good tune. Loverboy, I think they're Canadian, right?
Yeah.
So it was nice to see them on the songs of the year.
Mm.
And I Love Rock and Roll is a pretty cool Jonah Jett song.
And my memory of the 1982 songs, I was, this is before I was born, but like I said, a lot of these songs came back in a big way when I was in high school. A lot of my friends in my hometown, they like to drink to songs like Working for the Weekend, Don't Stop Believing, and I remember hearing Jack and Diane quite a bit, like at parties. And Eye of the Tiger is kind of like one of those, you see it in like a montage where somebody's preparing to...
Some type of pump up.
Yeah, it's like when they're working out and they're getting ready for the final battle or something.
And Olivia Newton-John was huge in the early 80s.
Yeah. I remember hearing that song too. For the 1992 music, Red Hot Chili Peppers' Under the Bridge, that remains a really good song. Tears in Heaven is a bit of a downer, but yeah, it's a good, pretty well written. Black or White had that really famous music video, didn't it? Where it transformed Michael Jackson's face.
It was morphing of different people, different races,
different ethnicities and races, yeah. Achy Breaky Heart, I remember this distinctly. I remember it was huge when I was in elementary school, and like kids were dancing to it and singing to it.
Yeah, that's what's her name? Miley Cyrus?
Yeah, Miley Cyrus.
For people who don't know, that's her father.
Yeah. And Smells Like Teen Spirit, I think this is the song that put Nirvana on the map. I don't think they desired to be a mainstream band, but after this song came out, they became pretty well known. Song of the year, End of the Road, never heard of it. Maybe if you put it on, I'd recognize it. And like I mentioned, Tears in Heaven. I think the first cassette tape I bought was Eric Clapton's Unplugged. Yeah.
I think that won Album of the Year that year, too.
Yeah. That's the first cassette I ever bought. Some people can remember the first cassette they bought or the first CD they bought.
Yep.
That one was cassette for me.
My first cassette was Def Leppard, Pyromania. In 1982's TV news and other events in TV, the first episode of David Letterman's Late Night aired on NBC, and the Weather Channel aired on cable TV for the first time. Popular toys that released in 1982 were the Atari 5200 and the Glowworm. Some technical breakthroughs from 1982. The first CD player was sold in Japan, and the first implant of a permanent artificial heart was done. And in some news and events from 1982, the largest cash robbery in history, almost $10 million in cash, was stolen in New York City. I think it was an armored car, I'm not sure. The Ocean Ranger, the world's largest oil rig, sank in the North Atlantic. The Canada Act is signed, giving Canada full sovereignty and independence from England. Argentina invades the Falkland Islands, and the UK take it back. The first issue of US Today is published, and Epcot Center opens in Disney World.
And for 1992 in TV, the Cartoon Network is launched, Barney and Friends debuts on PBS, and Sinead O'Connor causes controversy when she rips up a picture of Pope John Paul II on NBC's Saturday Night Live. Also in 1992, the Seinfeld episode, The Contest, is broadcast on NBC. Despite its controversy, the episode will go on to win an Emmy Award and be named as the #1 episode of all time by TV Guide. Some popular toy releases in 1992 were Troll Dolls. And for this one, Troll Dolls actually, they started in the United States as a toy fad in the early 1960s, from 1963 to 1965. The originals were of the highest quality, also known as Damn Dolls, and featured sheep wool hair and glass eyes. In 1992, the plastic versions were released in North America and were a huge hit among boys and girls. Some technical breakthroughs of 1992, the IBM Simon, a touchscreen mobile phone and personal digital assistant considered the first smartphone, was introduced. And on December 3rd, the first text message was sent. The message read, "Merry Christmas." Some notable news events from 1992 include John Gotti, the Teflon boss, is sentenced to life in prison. Bill Clinton became the U.S. president, and LA riots occurred after the acquittal of 4 white police officers accused of beating black motorist Rodney King. Also in 1992, the U.S. forces left the Philippines, ending nearly a century of American military presence. And the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, is signed on December 17th, 1992.
So a lot of the stuff from 1992, obviously, I remember. I remember John Gotti. I definitely remember the LA riots. The Seinfeld thing, is that the one where they make a bet who can hold off from jerking off the longest?
Yeah. Or for masturbating, because
Right.
Elaine's involved as well.
It's one where Kramer comes in and slams the money down and says, I'm out.
Yeah, he slams the money down and he says, I'm out.
Okay, I remember that. As far as the news goes, like from 1982, I don't remember pretty much anything. I've never been to Disney World, so I know of the Epcot Center, but the Canada Act thing I might know of, not directly, but like when I was a kid in elementary school, every morning we had to sing "O Canada" and say the "God Save the Queen" thing.
Oh, really? You had to say the "God Save the Queen" thing as well?
One of those, something regarding England. Like we always had a photo of Queen Elizabeth in our classrooms and stuff. And maybe that disappeared after that.
Most likely, yeah, because I remember singing "O Canada," but nothing to do with the Queen or anything.
And obviously David Letterman, I watched a lot of when I was older. So it's cool to see that he started off in 1982 with NBC.
For me, for the 1992, I do remember Sinead O'Connor ripping up the picture of Pope John Paul II. This caused a huge controversy. I don't think she was welcome back to that TV program.
Actually, I remember that a lot too. I watched that live, so I didn't think anything big of it at the time, but...
Yeah, there have been a few artists over the years who've done like these kind of political things on SNL. Like I remember, I think Eddie Vedder wrote something about like women's rights on his arms as he was performing on SNL. The Seinfeld episode, The Contest, I don't think I understood at that time what masturbation was. I was too young for that. But I remember...
I was probably masturbating at the time.
Yeah, it was a little early for me. But I remember my dad loving Seinfeld, and he was laughing his ass off at this episode in particular. But I just didn't understand what it meant. Troll dolls, yeah, I remember my sister collected them. I wasn't a big fan. I was into like more like G.I. Joes and, action figures. Technical breakthroughs, I don't remember any of the text message thing or anything like that. And for the news events, I remember seeing the LA riots on TV. I didn't really understand what that was all about. And John Gotti, I didn't learn about until later in life.
Of course, there was a lot more music, movies, and news events from both 1982 and 1992, so feel free to let us know about your favorites and your memories of these specific years in the comments below, wherever you find this podcast.
Yeah, we'd love to hear from you regarding these years and get your feedback. Now let's move on to the main topic of this episode. It's time for Battle of the Decade.
3, 2, 1.
Battle of the Decade.
Fight.
I must break you.
Round 1. Let's fight.
Choose your fighter.
So for me, from the 1980s, I have some honorable mentions. There's all kinds of, 80s is known for fashion. So some honorable mentions that I didn't choose were like big hair or crimped hair. You had the whole 80s metal hair bands and girls with the big hair. Everybody had big hair.
A lot of mousse, a lot of hair
mousse. Texas hair, I think some people called. There were leg warmers or leggings, I think they were called. We had tight jeans, acid-wash jeans, and ripped jeans were all throughout the 80s. Lace shirts and accessories were really popular. I think made popular by Madonna, maybe. Swatches were kind of popular. And pretty much anything neon colors were in the 1980s. But my choice for the most popular fashion trend in the 80s were parachute pants. And these were popular around 84 and 85, or the mid-80s.
And my picks for the 1990s fashion trends, the runners-up are grunge rock. The grunge rock look included flannel shirts, ripped jeans. These were popularized by such bands as Nirvana and Pearl Jam. And another honorable mention for 1990s fashion trends was the hip-hop trend, wherein people wore baggy jeans, sportswear. This is when sportswear became acceptable to wear in public throughout the mid to late 1990s, especially oversized t-shirts, baseball caps, and sweaters. And another honorable mention is preppy clothing. And this is when young men wore khaki slacks, canvas boat shoes, and navy blue blazers. The most famous brands of preppy clothing included Gap, Old Navy, and Abercrombie and Fitch. But my choice for the best fashion trend of the 1990s is Britpop.
Round 2. Let's fight.
Tail of the tape.
All right, so in this round, the reasons why I chose parachute pants from the 80s. So when I was 11 or 12 years old, these pants were everywhere. I mean, everybody wore them. You saw them on TV, musicians, actors, and all the kids at school were wearing them. I had more pairs of these probably than I had of any other types of pants, even jeans. They were famous from hip-hop and mostly breakdancing, which I and many others were into at that time. Popular and famous people like MC Hammer and Michael Jackson's, made them really commonplace, and people wanted to wear pretty much everything that Michael Jackson was wearing at the time. They came in many different styles and colors, baggy and tight. The most common that I had and saw were parachute pants with zippers. I wouldn't say they were tight, but they weren't baggy, and they had zippers all over the place. Like, the more zippers, the better. They were good for, or at least we thought they were good for breakdancing, as we thought the material was better for sliding on our cardboard mats. This actually wasn't the case because all of the zippers would rip the shit out of your legs. And they were kind of waterproof, or at least it seemed like they were waterproof, so they were good for all types of weather.
And for my choice, I chose Britpop for 1990's best fashion trend. This was in the mid-1990s when indie rock, Manchester, and Britpop bands such as Blur, Stone Roses, and Oasis resulted in a revival of 1970s fashions, including mod haircuts, aviator sunglasses, denim jackets, green parkas, Harrington jackets, velvet sports coats, striped shirts, Ben Sherman polo shirts, t-shirts bearing the RAF roundel and Union Jack motif, including the dress worn by my favorite Spice Girl, Jerry Halliwell. The reason I chose Britpop is because it brought attention to some great music coming out of the UK at that time. It looked cool, it kind of still resonates with today's youth, and it paved the way for indie rock music fashion that blew up later on at the beginning of the 21st century.
Round 3. Let's fight.
Counterattack.
So as far as Britpop goes, I've actually never heard of Britpop style or Britpop. Probably I had friends that dressed that way in the 90s because I had a lot of friends that were into some of those bands you mentioned, like Stone Roses and things like that. But the way they dressed or the style that you're describing, it just kind of seemed like common clothes, with people wearing the odd band t-shirt here and there. I was never into the UK scene or that type of music like Stone Roses or Blur or Oasis, bands like that. So that might just be the reason that whole style kind of went over my head. It sounds very plain and just kind of blah, just sounds like regular clothing to me. So it's not really noticeable and weak. Again, it sounds similar to grunge, but even less popular or noticeable. Parachute pants scream 80s. Britpop not only doesn't scream, it doesn't even make noise, because you wouldn't even notice it if somebody was wearing it.
And my thoughts on parachute pants? Well, I only know these from MC Hammer's Can't Touch This. Aside from that, I don't think it was iconic for the 1980s. I think when I think back to the 1980s, I think more of like hair bands, tight jeans, ripped shirts, things like that. I don't see parachute pants as being, very cool. I guess maybe if you're into breakdancing, but
I never said they were cool. I just said they scream 80s.
Okay, well, in that case, I don't think they scream 80s, because I remember actually them making a comeback, and I remember actually wearing a pair with the zippers, with all the multiple zippers in it when I was in high school. So,
Round 4. Let's fight.
Final round.
And in the final round, once again, I think parachute pants were just a great style. With, different looks for everybody and their own personal taste. You could get skinny, wide, baggy, and all kinds of different colors. They were easy to take care of, they were easy to put on, and they were comfortable due to the material. Some of them had many pockets and zippers to store things or add on accessories to. Even though they're not as popular now as the 80s, they're still around and in demand. You can find them almost anywhere to buy, even on places like Amazon. They were very durable, year-round, weather-resistant, comfortable, and just plain out cool. Even though I just said they weren't cool, looking back, they kind of were kind of cool. I don't know if I'd wear them now, but they were cool as a kid. They were a big part in defining the retro look of the 80s that everyone is into now. If I saw this Britpop style today, I wouldn't even recognize it or even notice it or be able to pin it to a decade. Parachute pants, right away, you think 80s. That's why my choice is parachute pants.
And some final notes for my choice. I think I chose Britpop because it's cool. It looks pretty awesome. It makes you think of like classic 90s bands like Oasis and Blur. And it just kind of looked, really interesting for that time. I like it. Almost hails back to, Beatlemania in a way, but for the 90s. It's when, North Americans were kind of embracing UK music culture. And that's why I chose it. I thought the Spice Girls were pretty huge when I was in middle school. So my final thought on Britpop is, don't be a wanker, mate. You should be chuffed by this fashion trend.
So which decade do you think had the best fashion trend? Do you think it was the 1980s or the 1990s?
Remember, you can vote on which of these fashion trends you thought was better in the poll in the above top right corner here on YouTube or on any of social media at 10 Years Apart Pod or at our website 10yearsapart.com.
And finally, on this episode of 10 Years Apart, we're going to look back at a 1980s gadget fad that was known as the Ghetto Blaster. Could it make a comeback? Why did it fade away? It's time for Would That Fly Today?
Would that fly today?
The boombox, beatbox, portable radio, or portable stereo, and just plain old tape player. These were just some of the common names for what was also known as the Ghetto Blaster. They were a thing in the 1980s, I believe between the years of 1983 and 86. Adam, do you remember Ghetto Blasters or know of that name?
I remember my brothers owning Ghetto Blasters. I had to share a bedroom with one of my older brothers before the other older brother moved off to college. And he constantly blared NWA and Public Enemy. I was a young kid at that time, so I don't have the fondest memories of Ghetto Blasters because that really wasn't the music I was into as a youngster. On the other hand, I thought they were pretty cool and that they were battery powered and you could bring them to what we call bush parties in Canada, where these are parties that take place in the woods around a campfire.
Yeah, those old school, I don't know what, the big batteries.
Yeah.
There's not too many things you need those for anymore.
Right. And, when I think of Ghetto Blasters or Boombox, I always think of the iconic image of a young guy carrying one on his shoulder in like these hip-hop music videos and movies from the mid-'80s.
I kind of have a whole different perspective on it because I was into metal and heavy metal, and it was a big part of metalheads. Mm-hmm. So it was a big part of my childhood, at least in my early teens. Even though they were popular with hip-hop in the rap scene, they were also huge with the metal culture, which I just said I was into. I remember being so proud of getting my first Ghetto Blaster, playing the Motley Crue tape, Shout at the Devil, and listening to their version of Helter Skelter over and over again while we played basketball and shot some hoops. I remember every day, or at least for a time in elementary school, a big freak in our school, who was a year older maybe, he would be blaring Killer Giants by Ozzy Osbourne during recess and lunch. He also had the biggest Ghetto Blaster I ever seen in my life. Mm. I also remember when they got the detachable speakers, so you could carry them around with the speakers attached, or you could set them up at home, detach the speakers and, spread them out. So it was more like a home entertainment or stereo system.
Yeah, I remember that too.
And they were also big for me regarding sports and in the locker rooms. So they're great for tunes in the hockey dressing room when I was young. Somebody always brought a Ghetto Blaster into the dressing room to play songs.
Right.
So why do you think Ghetto Blasters faded away?
I think the many reasons. For one, they're big and clunky, and these days people are all about portability and easy storage for music things. You see some of these speakers now that are quite small and you can wirelessly hook them up to your phone. They probably have better sound than Ghetto Blasters had. I think they've had their time because, like I said, people like small things that they can carry around and just tuck into their backpack, whereas Ghetto Blasters, you'd think of someone carrying them and it's usually up on their shoulder.
Yeah, I think Ghetto Blasters faded away for the same reasons you mentioned. I mean, once Walkmans came around and things got more portable, tapes became obsolete and music just became streaming in files. The Ghetto Blaster died off with that and, of course, evolved into more of just a common home shelf stereo. I also think music trends also had an impact with them and, a reason for them fading away. So like the death of breakdancing and hair metal saw the lack of need for the Ghetto Blaster. So do you think Ghetto Blasters could fly today?
Probably not. I think for the reasons we mentioned earlier. Also, when I think of Ghetto Blasters, it's, there's this time in the past when people used to listen to music, as a group. Whereas I think nowadays, you see a lot of people listening to music, with their AirPods or their AirBuds. I think now when people listen to music collectively, it's usually at like a music concert or at like a nightclub or live music venue. So no, I don't think they'd fly today. I think they would only be seen in probably movies that, they show like some retro scene from the 80s with a guy with one of these on his shoulder. Do you think that Ghetto Blasters would fly today?
No, I'm on the same boat as you. I don't think there's no need for them. They're not useful with today's technology in the music industry today. I could see them as like a retro novelty type thing. If they played like music files or had the ability to, play streaming services like Spotify. Mm-hmm. But other than that, no, the Ghetto Blaster is part of the past.
Also, give us your feedback on Ghetto Blasters in the comments below. You can also share with us your memories of the boombox on our social media at 10 Years Apart Pod or on our website, 10yearsapart.com. Ghetto Blasters, would they fly today? No.
Well, that's it for this episode of 10 Years Apart. Thanks for listening, and you can now help us out by helping us decide which decade had the best fashion trend. Just head over to our website at 10yearsapart.com or any of our social media at 10 Years Apart Pod and vote right now. Leave us your comments and thoughts below wherever you find this podcast.
Join us again next week when we talk about which decade had the best gaming console. Make sure you subscribe to the podcast on iTunes or anywhere you find podcasts so you never miss an episode. If you came across this episode and enjoyed it, please hit that like button. Subscribe to us here on YouTube for the latest videos, and don't forget to share. Sharing really helps us out.
And once again, find us at 10yearsapart.com or any social media at 10 Years Apart Pod. Stop by, vote, let us know some of your stories from the 80s or the 90s.
Remember to like, subscribe, share, and leave us your comments wherever you found this podcast. And thanks again for tuning into the past with us here on 10 Years Apart. Hit that thumbs up button below if you like this video of 10 Years Apart. Also, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more episodes on the 80s and 90s. Vote on this episode's main topic in the top right corner or at 10yearsapart.com. Leave us your comments on the 80s or 90s. We love hearing from you. Plus, get more great videos like this video right here. Like, subscribe, share, and thanks for watching 10 Years Apart.